Hello, I'm CJ Wellerman, and in this episode, we reveal how the United States and the rest of the world now hates everything about the state of Israel. But first, please remember to like and subscribe to our show. Now let's get into it. As a journalist and activist, I've been covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since 2010, and with one specific objective: to counter the billions of dollars that Israel spends in coercing Western politicians and the mainstream media outlets to bend to its will and conceal its criminality. Most of all, my journalism has sought to help Western audiences understand how Israel's criminal occupation of the Palestinian territories is not only the single source of violence in Palestine, but also the number one source of chaos and instability in the Middle East. But, to be perfectly frank, writing and talking about Palestine for the past 15 years has often felt like shouting into an empty room, due to the pernicious nature of Zionist propaganda and the stranglehold Israel has over the political and media class. That is until now, because the sand has suddenly shifted beneath Israel's feet. We are witnessing something I really never actually believed was possible: that an overwhelming majority of Americans, Europeans, Australians, and Canadians now understand what the rest of the world has long understood. That Israel is little more than a criminal real estate enterprise, and that dispossessed and displaced Palestinians are its victims. We are talking about a truly monumental change in global opinion. Put simply, everybody now hates Israel, including an overwhelming majority of Americans. They hate Israel because they have witnessed 400 consecutive days of genocide. 400 days of warplanes bombing schools, homes, and hospitals. 400 days of funerals, burials, and grief. 400 days of terror, dispossession, and displacement. And 400 days of sniping children for sport, and 400 days of mass rape. These headlines describe a level of cruelty and barbarity that the world will never unsee, and that a majority of Americans will never forgive. Even famous economists like Jeffrey Sachs acknowledge that the times are a-changing.
And this has been a shocking period. It's so vulgar, it's so out there, the bombing is so relentless, the viciousness of it is so terrible that it has shocked the American people, especially young people, but actually, the few times I've said that on air, lots of older people have written to me indignantly saying, I'm against Israel too, what it's doing. So it's actually a pretty widespread view.
This sudden and dramatic shifting of attitudes towards the Palestinians and against Israel guarantees the end times for the Jewish state. There's just no way that Israel can survive without an economic and diplomatic lifeline from its Western allies. And last week, another nail was hammered into Israel's coffin at the United Nations, where it lost another of its diplomatic shields when Australia, for the first time in its history, voted to recognise Palestinian sovereignty.
After more than 13 months of war, today a symbolic step.
Draft Resolution L40 is adopted.
Australia breaks ranks with the United States and Israel, voting to recognise permanent sovereignty of the Palestinian people over their natural resources in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and of the Arab population in the occupied Syrian Golan.
The Australian government now recognises Palestine for the simple reason that the country's changing political landscape has made defending Israel's criminality politically untenable. Now that an overwhelming majority of Australian voters support Palestinian liberation. I must say, I've never been prouder of my fellow citizens. Australians now get it. They understand that international law and basic human decency dictates opposition to the Zionist occupation. And even more encouragingly, the changing of attitudes that we are witnessing in Australia is emblematic of the change that's sweeping across the world. The battle lines against Israel are growing wider, longer, and stronger, as illustrated on this map. The countries highlighted in the colour green recognise the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, which leaves only Israel, the United States, Argentina, Paraguay, Micronesia, and Nauru in opposition to Palestinian statehood. That's it. That's all there really is, therefore making Israel more diplomatically isolated than ever before. And bearing in mind that Micronesia and Nauru have a combined population of only 127,000 people, while Argentina and Paraguay have almost zero influence over the direction of global politics and the global economy. The United States stands alone then as the sole defender of the Zionist occupation. This new reality, this changing political landscape, has sent Israel into a panic mode because it's acutely aware a growing majority of American voters now support Palestine, a trend that is transforming and reshuffling the Democratic Party. So much so that Kamala Harris's unwavering support for Israel ultimately cost her the 2024 election.
Many of Vice President Kamala Harris's rallies in the closing days of the campaign were interrupted by people angry about the mounting death toll in Gaza and Lebanon and the Biden administration's support for Israel. That anger may have been expressed at the polls. In Dearborn, Michigan, where 55% of the residents are of Middle Eastern descent, 4 years ago, President Biden got 69% of the vote. This year, Harris got 36.
Harris made a colossal political mistake in not recognizing that support for Palestine among Democratic voters has been building exponentially since 2016, when Bernie Sanders, an American Jew, spoke on behalf of the growing pro-Palestinian movement during a presidential debate.
Long run, if we are ever going to bring peace to that region which has seen so much hatred and so much war, we are going to have to treat the Palestinian people with respect and dignity. So one is not to say that right now in Gaza, unemployment is somewhere around 40%. You got a lot of that area continuous and hasn't been rebuilt. Decimated, houses decimated, healthcare decimated, schools decimated. I believe the United States and the rest of the world have got to work together to help the Palestinian people. That does not make me anti-Israel. That paves the way, I think.
Thank you, sir.
For an approach that works in the Middle East.
Thank you. Secretary.
This trend line is not only obvious, but also irreversible. Future leaders of the Democratic Party will be forced by its voters to stake a pro-Palestine position, which represents the ultimate doomsday scenario for Israel, a scenario that moves ever closer into view now that the United Nations has officially accused Israel of committing genocide.
Israel's critics have long accused it of genocide, and this latest report is the closest the UN has come to agreeing with them. The 21-page report accuses Israel of characteristics it said were consistent with genocide, citing mass civilian casualties and life-threatening conditions for Palestinians.
Damning evidence of genocide will shift more Americans, the same way it has led European countries to take an openly hostile stance towards Israel, which is unsurprising given the continent suffered the worst genocides of the previous century. And European governments are responding in kind, with Spain, Ireland and Norway following the will of their voters in recognizing a Palestinian state.
As you heard just there, relations between Israel and the EU have reached a new low as Spain and Ireland this Tuesday, along with Norway, prepare to formally recognise a Palestinian state. In response, Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz told Spain that its consulate in Jerusalem will no longer be allowed to provide assistance to Palestinians as of Saturday.
6 months ago, a survey found that an overwhelming majority of British citizens oppose the UK government's sale of weapons to the genocidal Zionist state. 3 months later, the UK government responded by partially suspending arms sales to Israel. But this move fell well short of voter expectations, therefore forcing the government to announce last week that it has suspended all weapon sales to the Jewish state. This is welcome news. But France went even one step further in calling for a total arms embargo against Israel to prevent it from expanding its war in the Middle East, prompting a hysterical and desperate response from Netanyahu.
Shame on them. Is Iran imposing an arms embargo on Hezbollah, on the Houthis, on Hamas, and on its other proxies? Of course not. The axis of terror stands together. But countries who supposedly oppose this terror axis call for an arms embargo on Israel. What a disgrace.
In the videos.
As you can see, the world is turning against Israel, leaving it isolated and left alone to wither and die on the proverbial vine. And if you think that I'm only engaging in wishful thinking, then think again. because what I'm predicting here is nothing more and nothing less than what Israeli leaders are saying themselves, with former leaders and generals predicting societal and economic collapse as others forewarn of looming civil war. The Zionist occupation has only itself to blame, and when future historians finish writing Israel's final chapter, they will also credit you, me, and every other decent person on this planet who has posted or shared evidence of the Zionist army's war crimes on social media. And historians will also credit anyone who's posted a tweet, liked a tweet, or shared a tweet in service of the Palestinian struggle for freedom. Every little action that you have made on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube has forced their respective algorithms to push pro-Palestinian content higher and higher, therefore helping to build solidarity for Palestine and Lebanon. And every time you have liked our episodes, shared our episodes, or posted a comment, it has helped put our content in front of new audiences, therefore helping to counter Zionist lies and propaganda in the mainstream media. And to those who have marched in the streets of your home cities to call for an immediate ceasefire and an end to the Israeli occupation, well, I'm absolutely certain a special place has been reserved for you in heaven. But that's all the time we have for today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we kindly ask that you please support our effort to expose and confront injustices in the Muslim world by becoming a member of this show at patreon.com/CJ Werleman. We can't produce, sustain, and grow this show without your help, and we offer exclusive benefits to those who do. But for now, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and stay blessed.